Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our topic is a symmetrical type of position and how to make plans, attacks, and targets in such situations. Let's get to our position that we'll examine today, where we just played about 15 moves. It's after White's 16th move that we reached this position, and it is Black's turn right now. We can see that Black has fully developed. The two bishops are nicely pasting towards White's pawns e4 and f2. Also the knights are certainly in very typical and reasonable positions on d7 and f6, controlling key central squares. Black's rook is already on one of the two open files on c8. The queen is the only one of the black pieces which hasn't moved yet, but at any given time it has the opportunity to simply move to e7 when wanted or needed, in order to potentially let the other rook to the second open file to d8. So if we look at the situation from Black's perspective, we can certainly see that Black is doing just fine. Now, let's look at it from the other side. How is White doing? Well, White has certainly castled, developed most of his pieces, but not quite all. We can see that the dark squared bishop is still sleeping at home on c1, which as a result doesn't let the rook on the queen side corner get out. So in that sense, Black has a tiny bit of lead in development. And remember, it is still Black's turn. So with all that taken into consideration, we can see that Black at least has a comfortable position. However, in such situations, by making one or two just regular moves, unambitious moves, we all of a sudden can let this dynamic, this initiative, this lead in development slip out of our hands if we're not careful. Because, for example, if it was White to move at this moment, White could play real quick, for example, b4, chasing our bishop back. That was pretty well positioned where it is right now, and then let the bishop to b2 onto the long diagonal, and all of a sudden the picture could change real quick once the white rooks also get onto the open c and or d files. One thing that certainly goes for White at this very moment, and that is that White has a pawn already on e4. Of course, that may work for him or against him, as we'll find out. But the good thing about it is, on one hand, that it limits the power of Black's bishop on b7. It also takes away the central d5 square from the black pieces, and specifically from Black's knight, and also it gains space, right? It lets the dark squared bishop out if it chooses to go in that direction on the c1 h6 diagonal. And in addition to all of the above, White also can at times push e5 and gain further space, and also chase the knight away from f6. So there are a lot of things going on. e5 is one of the threats, b4 is a second one, so the position can become very dynamic and actually change in evaluation rather quickly. If Black, for example, would play a move like queen e7, it would be a mistake. So I suggest you take some time, maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and try to figure out a game plan for Black. What should Black do in this position? And this is something very typical for such pawn structure, which is especially common from openings such as the Queen's Gambit accepted, the Meran, or even sometimes the Queen's Gambit declined. So if you play any of those openings, it's absolutely necessary that you become familiar with such positions, and as you shall see, this is a very good and typical example of ideas that can happen in such positions when you see there are no c and d pawns, they are already traded off, There are 2 pawns on the queen side symmetrically positioned, as well as 4 pawns on the king side of the board, also kind of symmetrically positioned more or less. Okay, so hopefully you did spend a little bit of time trying to think about what black should do about the situation, and then come back and check out what happened in the game and how black should proceed right now. One idea that in one way makes logical sense but is not the greatest idea at this moment is to play e5. The idea of this move would be to prevent white playing e5 and gaining space. The clear disadvantage of this would be that it opens up the f5 square for white's knight, and that would be certainly a very nice development from white's perspective, because now that knight is really excellently positioned where it is, because it's targeting black's g7 and h6 pawns. So on one hand, white will be always considering a sacrifice on h6 or even sometimes on g7. And the other problem that black has is that it's pretty much never that they'll be able to play g6 chasing the white knight out of there, because then the h6 pawn would always get into trouble. So it's almost like an eternal outpost for the white knight, and white can simply prepare, perhaps moving the knight from f3 maybe to h4, and then get the queen out there to the g file, and can develop an excellent and super dangerous attack against black. So going back again to this position, if it's not e5, black needs to do something about the situation. And the move that black played in the game, and as I said is a very typical one, is knight to g4. Well, let's think about this move. Why is it good? Well, if black can get a knight on e5, that would be certainly good news, because A, the knight is centralized, B, the e-pawn of whites cannot advance further, and in many cases the knight can perhaps even develop an attack on the king's side, of course depending on what white may be doing. Then again, black at the moment is even putting pressure on f2. But as we shall see in the game, that will become irrelevant, because black generally wouldn't want to just take on f2, which of course the white rook could capture, and then bishop captures rook, and queen or king captures the bishop. That's a typical trade that can happen in many openings, including the Guccio Piano or Rui Lopez or many others, where white or black has that typical opportunity to get the bishop onto c4, a knight to g5, or like in this case with reversed colors, a black bishop to c5 and a knight on g4, and then do that trade, the bishop and knight, for the other side's castled king and rook, right? In this case the rook and pawn, which is 5 + 1, 6 points, versus the bishop and knight. Generally that's not a good trade from the perspective of the bishop and the knight. Why? Because in this case black would wasted a bishop move, 2 knight moves so far, and then by the trade itself that 2 more moves, that's 5 moves, while all white did is castled. So that would be a waste of time without any material gain. So generally speaking, that's not a real threat. Okay, so in the game right now, white continued as planned by playing b4. Just to mention, if white would play h3, as we said, black would not capture on f2, but would simply reposition his knight on e5. Actually, black can choose which knight to put on e5. Naturally, the one that's being attacked could go there, and it's a completely fine choice. But even moving the other knight is an option, because now not only the knight from e5, but also black's queen from d8 is targeting white's bishop on d3. So either knight can go to e5, and black will be doing just fine. So let's go back again to the game situation and follow up with the game where white continued by playing b4, attacking the black bishop. And as we said, we do not want to capture on f2 unless there is something immediate, tactical, or once in a while strategical gain from that trade. If just it's a normal bishop and knight trade for the rook and pawn, you generally do not want to do that in this typical scenario into a castled position. So now the bishop retreated simply to d6, which is the second best place that the bishop can be, again still aiming towards the white king. And the white continued as planned, developing with the bishop b2. And so did black by playing knight e5. Again, the other knight could have gone there as well. Chances are things could have been very, very similar, especially if white would trade on e5 anyway, like he did in the game. Knight e5. I have to say that at this moment I would seriously consider also trading with my bishop to get rid of white's dark squared bishop. Why? Because then the remaining bishops on the board, the light squared bishops, I like black's clearly better. A, I think it's more actively positioned, and B, because of white's e4 pawn, the d3 bishop is somewhat limited. But not to say that knight e5 would be a mistake. There is a cute tactical trap here. If white right now would play knight to h5, which at first may be a good looking move, threatening with various things, combining the power of the bishop on b2 and then trying to play f4 and combining the cooperation of the dark squared bishop and the knight on h5 towards the g7 pawn. So there could be ideas, either playing f4 right away if white could make another move, or to capture on g7 first, and if the king recaptures, then to use the resulting pin by playing f4. However, that's a little bit of dreaming, because black actually can right now capture on d3. And now the problem is that white cannot recapture on d3 because the queen now is on an unprotected square, allowing black to immediately win by the discovery of bishop h2. So as you can see, it doesn't matter whether the game has a positional direction or not. Tactics are always in the picture, and you can never be a good chess player without being sharp tactically. That's why my suggestion always is that the most important thing to a developing chess player is to solve puzzles, to sharpen your tactical skills. And I have news for you. That's not even to stop later if you become a master or a grandmaster. To keep up the tactical sharpness is always the most important quality of a chess player. So, right now, white decided to move the bishop away from this potential problem and moved it to b5, which of course controls some nice squares like d7. Also, white now has in mind to play f4 if black again just does a casual move like queen e7, for example. But black did nothing but casual by playing pretty imaginatively and aggressively, playing queen h4. So now things become really exciting and tense. Black, of course, is thinking to play next knight g4, which, as we shall see, white underestimated in the game. The best option white had is trying to prevent just that by playing h3. Now, another very typical plan for such situations, black would respond by playing knight g6, and we can see how strong black is on the dark squares, especially after the knight appears on f4. I certainly would choose black in this position anyways. But in the actual game, white played a very natural move in this position by playing rook a to d1, targeting the black bishop on d6. However, this is the next critical position in the game. Remember, a few moves ago when we started out in this example today, black's move was knight g4, and now a second time black plays an excellent knight g4 move with a second knight. So the knight went to g4, obviously threatening to checkmate, not leaving white the time to capture the bishop on d6, and pretty much forcing white to play h3. Now what's important here is that black couldn't have played knight g4 before calculating a pretty long variation, which was very important not to miscalculate, in other words, evaluate correctly, because otherwise black could actually stay behind, lose material. What we see right now is that in addition to the black bishop on d6 hanging, also the knight on g4 is in danger. Generally, in such situations, when there are two pieces under attack, only one can move away and then the other one falls, and that's certainly not good news. In this case, if black right now would try to trade off one of those attacked pieces, for example, bishop capturing white's knight on g3, that would fail because white would recapture simply with the pawn, attacking black's queen, and then whether the queen captures on g3 or moves elsewhere, the knight on g4 falls and white wins a piece. So that's not a solution in this case for black. So again, I suggest you try to calculate, and I'd like to point out that in order to come to a correct evaluation, you do need to constantly look for the best moves of both sides, not just your own moves, and be biased, evaluating it prematurely, stopping the calculation too early that, oh yeah, it's good for me. But you need to be in search for your opponent's very best move at each and every move. So I suggest you spend maybe 10 to 15 minutes. This is a long variation that requires precise calculation and has some very fine moves deeper into the line. Good luck in trying to figure it out. And welcome back. And here is what happened in the game. Black captures on f2. This in itself doesn't seem like a very difficult move, and if you would conclude that, okay, knight f2, white captures back with any of the pieces, then bishop takes g3, black won a pawn, that would be the end of the story. However, more experienced players would notice that white has another option as well, and that is to capture the bishop on d6. And again, here it's easy to stop the calculation after you see that the queen captures on g3 and also at the same time now attacks the rook on d6. So again, it's tempting to stop the calculation at this point, stating that, okay, white rook moves away and then knight captures on e4 or h3 and black is better, up a pawn, plus the attack continues. However, things are not quite as simple, because white has another intermediate move by moving the rook to d7. Now, the black bishop is attacked in addition to the black knight. And yet again, it's tempting to say that, oh, okay, but I can move my knight away with a check, and then I'll move my bishop away. And still, the situation is not quite as simple, because after king h1, all of a sudden, white has moved out of the pin. And again, both the black bishop and the black knight are under attack. So what to do now? If we move one away, the other one will still fall. If black plays now knight f4, white can capture that with the rook, and then capture the bishop on b7. And while materially black may be slightly ahead, white has a pretty active position, including a rook on the 7th, and things certainly wouldn't quite be very clear. However, here black continued very precisely. Played queen h4, very powerful move, because if now comes rook takes bishop, then of course a simple discovery, knight f4, would win white's queen. But now pawn captured knight. And now we reach the last critical moment in the game, where it's really important what to do next. The natural move, queen h3, would be a serious mistake, because after king g1, white's position actually would be okay. It would also be an error to now capture bishop e4, because after king h2, white protects the pawn on h3, and rook c2 will be met by rook d2. And again, white has an extra bishop. Although black has 3 pawns as compensation, the position is still rather unclear. So let's go back to this moment, and here for the last time in this example I'd like to invite you to think what black should do. Again, I would spend up to 5 to 10 minutes, depending on your level, in trying to find the correct move here for black. And that elegant move is playing rook c2, a very powerful move, getting the rook into the action. If queen takes rook, bishop e4 is extremely powerful. And what happened in the game, rook b7, it was an easily winning position for black also. After queen h3, king g1, black gave couple checks, repositioning the queen to g5. Of course, at this stage there were numerous ways to win, although I like this one, rook e2, and now bringing the rook into the game, rook d8, bishop c1, queen h4, queen g3, and of course this is an easily winning position for black, and in a few moves white resigned. An excellent example by Sigurd Jonsson on the black side of the game. And now let's see the jewel of the week. This endgame is a rather complicated one, and I suggest you spend a little bit of time figuring out what's the story here. The main challenge here is that if at some point white simply intends to capture black's pawn on a6, and if the black king gets to the corner to b8 or a8, the game will be automatically drawn due to the fact that white's bishop is of an opposite color from the potential promotion square of one or more white a pawns. However, what happens if the white pawn remains on the b file? Well, if white pawn remains on the b file and white succeeds to maintain his bishop, of course the game will be easily won. The problem is that at the very moment both the white bishop on g5 as well as the pawn on b5 are under attack. So the general problem is that if, for example, white now plays bishop back, then no more b pawn. If king takes pawn now, then the black king indeed just walks into the corner, and even if they end up losing the 2 pawns on the e and f file, it's still gonna be a draw. If right now white would try to prevent the black king getting into the corner, then the problem is that black's b pawn would run away, and as soon as the white bishop would stop that pawn from running, the black king can just walk into the corner. Also, if in the starting position white would play bishop f4, again trying to prevent the black king from walking into the corner, black would just play e5 immediately and open up that avenue towards the corner. So, what's the solution? The solution is pretty impressive. white can and should immediately sacrifice on f6. Now, if black captures on b5, then already bishop e5, and the black king is stopped from getting to the corner, and then the a pawn will arrive to promotion much quicker than black's pawn. So let's go back. Bishop f6, but what if black just takes? Well, then white actually ends up winning by simply advancing the pawn, so does black. And now the key is not to run after the f5 pawn, but to try to checkmate all of a sudden black's king the following way: f4, king a6, f3, king b6, and even though black's pawn arrives first, and now black's pawn promotes, and checkmate arrives. What a beautiful example composed by Cohn in 1940. I hope you enjoyed this beautiful jewel of the week and got some better idea on how to play the positions that we saw in the beginning of the lesson with the symmetrical type of pawn structure. The e5 square is really crucial for both sides who gets control of it. Thank you for listening, and so long until next time.